Stop arguing and adapt. Okay, you may already know that I've held tightly to some rather strong political opinions. If you know me for even just a few decades, or perhaps even just a few minutes, then you know that I think my opinions are the very best. At least until I change my mind, and then my old opinions are just opinions. And my new opinions are then the very best. I've been a sincere and even stubborn political activist. I've campaigned for clean water. I've campaigned against at least one war. And I've campaigned door to door as a volunteer for former U.S. Senator Mark Foley of Florida. If you recognize that name, by the way, you may know that his political career ended rather quickly in a scandal. He did win the election, but within a few more re-elections, he was a federal U.S. senator and had some scandal and went down in a media frenzy. So I've campaigned and won, but then been disappointed even with how that went, at least in the case of Senator Foley. I've also campaigned and lost, but then been grateful for the thing that I previously condemned and opposed. In other words, I revised my opinion over time, or revised my values. Some of you may already be able to relate to all of this that I'm saying. Some of you may not relate to that yet, but may eventually. Maybe your values and political opinions will change over time if they haven't already. So I'm not really writing, though, about how stubborn I've been or how sincerely I've argued. I'm just mentioning all of that to establish a possible common link between you and I, plus to contrast something quite distinct from all of that sincere arguing that I've previously have done about conflicts of diverse political opinions. So when I was focusing on what other people should do and how they should do it, according to me, that was one possible investment of my time. If I was the owner of a big company or even worked as a supervisor over others, then it might be very important for me to focus on what certain other people should do and how they should do it. However, when I focus my time on arguing with other people about what they should do and what they should not do, like people who aren't my employees, I found that such an investment of my time could be frustrating, exhausting, and even disturbing. Let me put it another way. I could get furious. I could get very upset. I could get defensive and condescending and argumentative and bitter. Those were the results available to me from focusing on arguing with others. So, when I recognized the pattern connecting the behavior and the apparent results of the behavior, like an experience of something between disappointment and burning outrage, those kind of experiences, well, I stopped arguing, at least not so much. Maybe I argued again about the same topic, maybe even with the same person. Or maybe I argued about some other topic at a future time. But my experience was that arguing was aggressive, like being pushy. And if two people arguing and I was one of them, then that meant that I was one of the two people arguing. I'm a mathematician kind of guy, so I'm pretty sure about that. So maybe I just was not very good at being pushy, though. But when I notice a lot of people arguing, and then many or all of them being upset by their own behavior of arguing and the results of it, well, I wonder if a lot of us are not very good at being pushy. We must not be if we just keep pushing and pushing and pushing, right? Because if we were very good at it, we would do it right the first time and wouldn't have to keep doing it over and over, right? So I was an opinion pusher. Further, I wasn't really very good at it. I didn't especially value the resulting experience produced by my behavior of pushing opinions on other people, opinions that they should share with me, because mine are the very best, right? So I was open to new results and new methods other than all the frustration and upset that came from all that arguing. So I began to study things like how people form their opinions. First studying particular opinions and how they form, but eventually studying the whole process of the forming of opinions from the perspective of psychology and neurolinguistics, or NLP. and even from spiritual traditions. So I also studied behavior in general, and not just pushy arguing, and not even just various forms of communication and language patterns, but all kinds of behaviors. I studied trends in behavior, and that led to studying the forecasting of trends in behavior, forecasting of various patterns of behavior. So in mid-2002, I was researching trends in general, and got interested in economic trends in particular, or certain ones at least. I got interested in some unusual trends in the lending behavior of investors who were lending money to the U.S. government, as in buying U.S. Treasury debt. Actually, I was not exactly interested in those trends so much as some historical correlations that fit with those lending trends. That lending behavior that was evident by mid-2002 corresponded to a high probability of recession and further implications. Now, I do not, which I'll mention in a moment, I do not have the data to share with you that I saw in 2002. Whatever it was that I was looking at the time, I do not currently have that to share with you. But I was looking at the U.S. Treasury yield curve, and the following chart is of the simpler spread of the U.S. Treasury yields between the short-term U.S. Treasury debt and longer-term U.S. Treasury debt. So even though the chart shown in the blog there is just the Treasury spread correlated to recessions, it still shows a distinct correlation. I do not actually know the source of that chart. I found it like searching for images on the internet, but the chart implies that the spread or range between the yield rates of various maturity periods of U.S. Treasury debt was such that in the early 1980s there was nearly a 90% probability of a recession, and the official recessions are shown in gray. You can see how there was this really big probability, according to that chart, over a 0.9 or over a 90% probability in the early 80s for a stretch there. And indeed, a prominent recession came soon thereafter. So I don't know the background of the chart. I don't know the source of it. I don't know how those computations were made. But that chart gives you an idea of the kind of things that folks like me were looking at, for instance, in the middle of 2002, and looking ahead and looking back at historical patterns and looking ahead at, given the particular distinctions of what was present in mid-2002, what might that indicate about the near future. So the author of that particular report that I was reading in 2002 was connecting the lending behavior relating to lending money to the U.S. Treasury to things like the future of real estate lending in the U.S. He forecast a real estate crash, and so did other authors that I had read by 2002. I read forecasts of a continuing rise in commodity prices, especially fuel prices. By 2004, my published articles focused particularly on the growing U.S. dependency on foreign source oil, as well as the reasons that I and many others expected a continuing rise in fuel prices, and what I expected those continuing rise in fuel prices to do to the economies of the U.S. and EU, and continue to do to the economy of Japan. In 2005, I was monitoring real estate trends. Again, in middle of 2002, I was alert to the distinct possibility of that a shift in the lending behavior of people lending money to the U.S. Treasury had implications for U.S. real estate lending, credit markets globally, and the rates of borrowing. In other words, the amount of borrowing that businesses and consumers were doing in U.S. real estate markets. So in 2005, I was monitoring real estate trends, and soon after the decline in mid-2005 in the real estate markets of Phoenix and Las Vegas, I published an article labeling that decline in mid-2005 as the first wave of a much bigger trend that would spread throughout the U.S., I predicted. Later, I asserted that the reasons that the two sprawling desert metros of Phoenix and Las Vegas had done so well prior to 2005 and then suddenly done so poorly was directly related to fuel prices. Sprawling desert metros are especially sensitive to fuel prices. When energy prices are at an all-time inflation-adjusted lows, as in 1999, and were expected, by many people at least, to continue to drop, it was already cheaper than ever to live in the desert, even through the searing summer heat. But 1999 was the reversal of those long-term drop in energy prices, and they started to rise. In fact, oil prices doubled in several months, starting in the latter part of 1999. By 2005, many new large homes in the outskirts of the sprawling desert metros had monthly energy bills of $400 or $500 or more per month, and that was just for a single residence. As energy costs rose, the cost for cooling the buildings of large businesses ballooned. Further, as gas prices quickly passed $2, $3, and even $4 per gallon, the long commutes from the distant outskirts in SUVs and other not-so-fuel-efficient vehicles went up right along with the energy bill, hundreds of dollars per month in expenses for commuting, rather than $100 per month as in the 1990s. So, did those ballooning energy costs have any relationship to the overall budgets and spending behaviors of those households and businesses? And if they did, were those patterns of changing behavior predictable? Well, I predicted them. Well, did such energy costs affect the willingness of people to enter new big mortgages, to live in those huge distant homes of the sprawling desert metros that would cost hundreds of dollars extra per month in energy bills and commuting costs as energy prices rose? And what if energy prices continue to rise? People realized, okay, there's some risk. There's some unanticipated issues and expenses. So note that a big part of the real estate boom of the sprawling desert metros was internal to those metros, meaning people moving further and further out to bigger and bigger homes that already lived within that desert metro. They just sprawled further and further. Could it be that eventually the huge portion of their budgets that they were spending on rising energy costs eventually brought the real estate boom to an end? Some of the similar patterns could be witnessed in other parts of the U.S. California, Florida. Again, some of the places that had some relatively high costs of cooling homes in the summer, high energy costs, where there's big metro areas and sprawling commuter webs. So in 2004, I had forecast, along with many other competent forecasters, that rising energy costs would bring the real estate boom and a lot of other booms to an end. By 2006, I began promoting videos online that specified the implications of the emerging real estate crash on the mortgage industry, or for the mortgage industry, and for financial institutions in general, not just mortgage industries in particular, but also including lenders like banks as well as Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and Countrywide. By 2008, as there was a wave of bankruptcies in the U.S. financial sector and in Europe also, I was looking for signs of the inevitable rebound. While other people were panicking and so forth, I began to think, okay, so that's the initial minor capitulation phase. Once that's here, then I'm going to start. Then I was starting to look for the rebound, the signs of a rebound. In early March 2009, only a few days before the reversal and rebound in the U.S. stock market, myself and many others looking at similar data and correlations published explicit forecasts of, in my case, a multi-month rally. That's the term I used in U.S. stocks. It lasted dozens of months, far exceeding the minimum targets that I forecast, but I have never had any reason to shift my long-term forecast that the rally of 2009 to 2011 was just a rebound within a much larger decline. I interpret data like the following two charts to support my published conclusions from 2003, and consistently since then, for a long-term shift. Not just what we've seen so far, but a much longer-term shift. The first chart shows a conspicuous absence of any rebound in consumer confidence in the U.S. in 2009 and 2010, and that's while stock market prices rebounded significantly. As you can see the chart, take a look at it. It's from Bloomberg Conference Board. It's actually, the data is from the blue line is from one source and the green line is from another, and they're just superimposed together there. The next chart is a chart of U.S. total GDP, including government spending, U.S. private sector GDP, excluding government spending, and U.S. government spending. Private GDP peaked in 2007, along with the stock market, and has not exceeded those highs, similar to the fact that stock prices haven't exceeded the highs of 2007 in the U.S. But the U.S. economy as a whole, total GDP, has continued to rise, not based on private sector spending, but based on government spending, and that's clearly shown in that chart. A lot of that spending was based on borrowing, in fact. So again, that second chart shows that the U.S. economy's new highs in 2009, 2010, 2011, new highs in GDP are based on all-time highs in government spending. And it doesn't show the all-time highs in government borrowing, but there's been a lot of borrowing lately too. So while Democrats may celebrate the new all-time highs in the GDP of the U.S., they may not know that so much of it is from government spending, and so much of that was paid for with borrowed money. Borrowed from who? Foreigners. So much of the private spending was also from borrowed money, including huge amounts also borrowed from foreigners. While many Republicans and Libertarians complain about the possibility of hyperinflation in the U.S. dollar, they may also fail to assess the simple reality of the source of much of that increased spending of the Obama administration: foreign source lenders. They borrowed the money, just like all those homeowners with big old mortgages. They borrowed the money from where? In some cases, foreign source lending. So huge government debts or deficits do not always resolve as hyperinflation. And I've repeatedly noted that the U.S. government really does not have authority over the U.S. dollar anyway, which is the private currency of a private business, the Federal Reserve Central Banking Syndicate. So, yes, it's hypothetically possible, and there are some cases where governments hyperinflated currency to reduce the actual market value of debt that they carried. However, the U.S. government doesn't have that authority. Government excess also resolves not only by hyperinflation, but also by things like rocketing tax rates. Rocketing tax rates, really high. And in some cases, default on the debt. That's a big concern to people who are now lending money or have been lending money to the government of Greece and the government of there's a variety of governments, whether they're national governments or counties or states or whatever, where people have some real concern about the creditworthiness or solvency of the governments or private businesses that they lend money to, as well as to the private consumers that they might lend money to. As a forecaster, one of my concerns was that the U.S. economy has been relying on too much borrowing. First, there was too much private borrowing for things like real estate mortgages, and according to me, there still is as of end of January 2012. And next, status quo politicians of whatever party produced what I consider too much public borrowing for things like bailing out the owners, aka shareholders, of financial institutions that got involved with that excess of the mortgage mania. So when there's that big, massive redistribution of wealth called taxation and government spending, whether it's for Social Security Administration or for a TARP program, T-A-R-P program, to bail out the owners or shareholders of financial institutions. Well, if those programs are funded by borrowing, then that means they'll be paid by future revenues. What kind of revenues do I mean? Well, taxes, confiscation of property, seizure of property, repossession, fines, fees, whatever source of government revenues there might be, including just selling assets, but also including collecting additional assets to sell, whether that's Canada or Iraq or a new technology. The solution for too much borrowing is not more borrowing. Consider, at least, that the solution for too much borrowing may not be more borrowing, whether it's private or public. Just borrowing doesn't resolve the problem of too much borrowing. So that's already been tried, more borrowing, to resolve the problem of too much borrowing. When was that tried? Well, how about in Japan in the 1990s and since then? Here's how that went for them. The Japanese stock market is still down about 80% after 21 years of recession. How long are recessions? There's a stock chart there in blue of the Nikkei 225 top stocks of Japan. In conclusion, let's stop arguing politics and adapt to the reality of markets. We're going to have to do that anyway, eventually. Just like the folks did in 2005 in sprawling desert metros with $400 per month electricity bills and $300 per month commuting costs. They got more fuel-efficient cars and moved closer to where they work, even if that meant a smaller home and hundreds of dollars less per month in bills for overhead. The people of Japan have adapted, so have everyone, anywhere, that has ever experienced a wave of economic conservatism. By the way, the decline in borrowing and the resulting decline in prices is simply a wave of economic conservatism. As for people who accuse me of negativity and have for the last 8-9 years, whatever, I do not consider conservatism to be negativity. But if you do, that may affect your behaviors and the natural results of your behaviors, like you might avoid conservatism. And as far as natural results of your behaviors, well, natural results are things like this: whether markets reward conservatism most or reward something else most. I have a video linked there, a hilarious video. It really is. It's probably the funniest video I've ever made. I watched it again a week ago, and it's great. It's 6 or 7 months old. Hilarious video Cara, my girlfriend, and I made about the kind of excuses people give for not adapting. Why adapting is too wrong. Hope you enjoyed this one, and feel free to enjoy that other one.